Welcome to the Josh Button Podcast, where we discuss health, wellness, and outliers from society. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Josh Button Podcast. Today is episode 57, and I am stoked to introduce and be joined by Mr. Jacob Diaz, the UnderCover Virologist. You have your own podcast as well. Germs are our friends. Please tell us all about your podcast, how you came to this, and the response has been overwhelming online. So share a little bit about what it's like, in this recent era of COVID and all of these other machinations of the mainstream that you are debunking and sharing with us all kinds of pertinent information that people need. Please.
Absolutely. Thank you, John, for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited. So my background, really, I did not have a background in any sort of medical liaison or no medical positions, no health, anything. I was just a regular guy. My background really was in private security, potentially law enforcement as well. So this was not where I was going to go. I always, worked out, took care of my health, but never a focal point in my life. That is until 2019, where COVID started. And what I was seeing, because I was living in the city at the time, I was like, I don't know if I agree with anything that they're saying. It doesn't match up with what I'm seeing in the streets, at the very least. Everything they're saying about us dropping dead and all that, I'm like, I see people walking perfectly fine. The homeless people are perfectly fine. Hospitals are pretty empty. What's going on? I don't really understand what's happening here. And then I just kind of delve right into it deeply to just get to the root. And then I got into touch with Alex Zeck in The Way Forward, Tom Cowan's work, Andrew Kaufman's work, Amanda Vollmer, a bunch of naturopaths and just natural healers. And we eventually came together to join a little group chat of a bunch of practitioners. And then from there, we just, shot the crap. We just started talking, sending each other studies, our own theories about it. And that then led me into reading 10, 15, 20 different books, hundreds upon hundreds of studies, returning to virology, infectious diseases. And I just then was like, okay, I need to make this my life because this is insane. Like everything I was taught is completely wrong. And the things I was being told were true in terms of the answers made perfect sense as to how the body works, how the body seeks to heal, how these infectious diseases didn't make sense when you actually looked into the statistics or how they say it happened, and how COVID was just a complete sham. Everything about it was just wrong. It was HIV 2.0, and we can get into that. But it's just the misuse of the PCR was a big thing for me. The lack of isolation for all viruses was another big thing, which is what now I focus on. And then I was like, let me just make my Instagram. Let me just teach people for free. Like I'll do this because I learned for free. All these people took their time out of their careers to help me learn. Let me just do the same for others. So my Instagram now, I reached 20K the other day, which was insane because I never expected that. I get very in-depth and in detail with these diseases, but people want to know about it, which is awesome. And I'm learning now to become a naturopathic practitioner. So that's going to be my career path. So to meld in natural healing with understanding the bioterrain, very important for people to learn to get the power of their health to them, not to the medical system, which unfortunately just perpetuates disease. And then I made a podcast to really go deeper into each disease because I make slides on my Instagram, but sometimes people don't want to read, so I'll read them out. I'll talk to you guys about it, and that's been an overwhelming success so far. Each podcast has done pretty well. I just did a Lyme disease one, so this is what I'm doing now, and I still work, obviously full time because I'm still going to school, but eventually I just want to go full into this, make this my career. So that's where I'm at. I'm just a normal guy that eventually learned about all this stuff. And now I'm debating virologists.
Well,
wow.
I got to be honest. I'm completely grateful for all your effort because, there is not any way, shape, or form there could be enough people with big enough megaphones to really stack up against what we are up against. And it's mountains and mountains of misinformation and years of indoctrination. And you see it everywhere. You literally see it everywhere. I myself am a jiu-jitsu practitioner, and ironically enough, I've gone through a little infection this week. And it's one of those areas where if you don't believe the mainstream, it doesn't really matter because you're not welcome on the mats. You're not welcome around other people who do believe that. And when you're taking care of something and somebody looks at you like, oh, you have some germs there that are going to possibly infect me or make me sick, the reaction is what we saw at the beginning of COVID with mask and social distancing and all this weirdness. So thank you very much for actually realizing that, there was another way, and then sharing that information with, I think, the most people possible in the most ways possible, because that's what we need right now more than anything else. So germ theory in itself, I've had this conversation a few different times. How do we attack this? And when what you're doing, the model that you're presenting is absolutely brilliant in my opinion, because it does give people an intro on your social platform where they can just listen, just sit there, let sink in what is going to sink in. And then when they're ready for a little bit more, go to your podcast, which is more long form and in depth. So when you are initially going into conversations with people about germ theory, how do you get them to open up, and what is your techniques?
So I say a couple things. The first thing I usually say is, did you know that we have more bacterial cells than blood cells? And they're always like, really? And then I go into, the gut microbiome is kind of like our second brain. And do you know that there's billions of fungus on your skin right now? Do you know that all bacteria change in your body? So if you truly think that germs are bad, why are you a germ? You are filled to the brim with germs. And this was, obviously with the germ theory history, what the guys like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch were all trying to disprove. They were trying to say that the body is sterile. They were trying to say that germs invade an area because they're opportunistic, like parasites, pathogens. They'll just take advantage of the body. Whereas natural medicine, especially with old traditional Chinese medicine, you have osteopathy, you have herbalism, you have naturopathy. All these different practices were very in tune with how germs support the body. And then came the new allopathic system, which has only been around for like 200 years, that focuses on drugs, suppressing symptoms, fast and easy medical care. It's not really care, it makes you worse. But to see an invader and then attack it, it's very a warlike mentality. And then you can perpetuate fear with that very thinking. So now you can make a customer just saying, yeah, there's a germ in you. It's going to get you. Here, take this drug. Oh, take these vaccines to prevent a germ from attacking you. Whereas germs themselves are associated with a disease process because their main role is to eat dead and dying tissue. They're staphotropes. That's the literal scientific term for bacteria, fungus, and yeast and mold. They eat dead and dying tissue. So if they're in your body and they just so happen to start eating something, that means that the area was damaged. And for you, for instance, you said you're a jiu-jitsu practitioner. A lot of times with people that I talk to, wrestlers, fighters, whatever, they get staphylococcus infection, staph aureus infection. And what they'll do, go to the doctor, they'll do a culture and they'll say, oh, there's staph on your skin, therefore you have a bacterial infection. However, staphylococcus aureus is always on your skin all the time. So logically speaking, if it's always on you, it can't be the cause of disease because you're perfectly fine most of the case. It's when you start to get very moist, you start to rub your skin against the pads, maybe get a cut. All of that becomes more irritated. So the bacteria that are native to that environment, they're going to be like, oh, okay, this is a little bad. Let's repair this tissue. In doing so, they're going to eat the dead tissue, push out the toxicity, which is in the form of pus, inflammation, which gets blood and nutrients in there. And then the staphylococcus metabolite actually helps heal the wound. So when you look at it like that, it's a very intelligent response by a changing in the environment or a stressor. So that's just a minute example of how bacteria are always going to work in unison with the body. The same thing with like gardening or farmers. If you don't have a rich microbiome in the soil, you're not going to get good crops because those microbes are converting all the toxicity into nutrition to the crops so that they grow stronger. So why would that be any different with us? They're going to eat the crap or convert the food into energy and nutrition so that we can grow stronger. And people are now, I mean, the last 10 years or so are getting into the gut microbiome, which is just a tip of the iceberg of how the microbial world works. But everyone knows the gut is basically our second brain. Everything we put in is going to be assimilated and used for energy, for cellular mechanisms, for obviously the macros and proteins and fats. It's going to be used for detoxification, all that stuff. And all of that's done by the gut microbiome, i.e., the germs. So to think that these guys are just bad is ridiculous. I mean, if whatever people believe, evolution, creation, whatever the case, we have been around for a very long time and we're not dead. The population is growing. If we were always there with the germs and germ theory was true, we wouldn't be here. We'd be dead if germs were truly opportunistic pathogens, but they're not. They're working in unison with us. We just have to listen to when they have action on our tissues and then support the body, not just try to keep suppressing and pushing down these symptoms, which makes everything more worse and then chronic.
Yeah, it's interesting you had said something about the homeless people on the streets in New York, because I noticed the same thing in LA when I was there, and it was like, wait, there's more and more homeless people showing up and inhabiting these absolute disgusting, dirty, overpopulated areas out in the middle of the desert heat, and this COVID is doing absolutely nothing to them. Nothing. They're flourishing in the absolute opposite of what we're suggesting that you need to flourish. So it didn't make sense. The skin infection thing didn't make sense with me a long time ago, but last year I had a couple spots and a staph infection, and I went ahead and I broke down and I went and got them swabbed. And what's wild about it is they came back after giving me the first antibiotic 4 days later and said, sorry, we actually didn't, there was no staph, there was no MRSA. We actually found strep or something else. They had two other things. So they gave me two different antibiotics and had me discontinue the first two. And look, at that point in time, I was worried enough about healing, and it had been a long enough period. I was like, I'm going to bite the bullet, destroy my gut health for the time being just to get over this. And I broke down and did it. But I learned in that instance, don't do this. don't take the antibiotic.
Exactly.
Don't rush yourself. Don't panic. Don't stress. And the last couple times I've had something come up, I let it run its course. I used naturopaths, and the reaction was completely different. It did clear. Something came out of me, and it took a little more time. I was a little more, patient with it, but the healing process is much better as well. So
exactly. And for anyone, like, symptoms are very easy to understand when you just look at it in terms of a natural health perspective. It's getting things out. And that's all it is. Like, especially with a cut or an opening during a fight or whatever, you can potentially get a lot of foreign material built up in that wound. So your body's like, what is this? Let's push it out. So you get that pus, you get that inflammation. But when you look at it logically, oh, my body just wants to get rid of this crap. Let's support it. And yes, it might take a couple days longer with a more natural approach, because natural approaches are much more easy on the body. They're not going to just straight up attack everything like antibiotics do. Antibiotics are general toxins. They don't focus or isolate on one specific germ, which is funny that they'll say, oh, you have strep, here, let's give you a different antibiotic. They're just giving you stronger ones, but they're going to still ruin your gut microbiome and everything on it. It's killing everything in its path, including messing with your pH, including messing with your adrenals. So now the symptoms stop because your body doesn't have the power to push out this stuff. And now you keep taking it for the course of 10, 20 years, you get cancer, and you're like, oh, what happened here? It was antibiotics all along. And there was a good study I put on my sepsis post recently that looked at the link between antibiotic use and cancer, and there was a major association there. But you just want to support your body. That's all it is. And we don't know how to do that.
Yeah, unfortunately, in the jiu-jitsu community, there are not only a lot of people that have been overprescribed, but there's quite famous and the greatest grappler alive, and at the moment, the best, has had stomach ailments and all kinds of health issues, most likely stemming from antibiotic overuse. And just he was consistently on them, and he said it as much that every time he turned around he would have staph. So he's probably giving himself more infections by taking that antibiotics and burying this stuff further and further. No,
absolutely. And that goes into another thing I would like to talk about. So the reasoning behind why the body would do that. So Josh, have you learned about pleomorphism?
No, I saw your preview of your podcast on it though. I'll be
Yeah.
listening to that one.
Yeah. So so you can
It's
listen to it. I go into
very
detail
recent.
with one of my with one of my favorite doctor friends, Dr. Mary Arce, who was trained in pleomorphism in school. But really, pleomorphism is the idea. It's not a theory, it's proven. It's the idea that germs can change into different germs depending on the environment that they inhabit. So we're talking like, for example, a streptococcus changing into a staphylococcus, changing into a fungus, changing into a mold. So this was shown by Antoine Béchamp and Gunther Enderlein. You had Claude Bernard. You had Gaston Nassans. You had all these different people, Max von Pettenkofer, throughout history that were showing if I change the environment in a culture or in soil or minerals, for instance, these germs are actually going to change to adapt to that environment. So in an instant where someone keeps taking antibiotics, the environment is getting more and more acidic, more and more toxic. Your organs actually stop working and when you keep taking antibiotics, at least in a normal way. So now everything becomes stagnant. Now your waste isn't being removed properly. Your lymphatic system kind of slows down. Your liver is trying to process these antibiotics. Now that's going to kind of get a little bit stagnant there. And now you're getting sicker and sicker. So the germ actually changes into a more stronger form. You could think of it like a tank. It turns into a tank so that it can survive that environment and work on the most toxic of environments. The same thing with a fungus. If you have a fungal issue inside of your body, not on the outside because that's where they live, primarily on the skin. If you have it on the inside, you're now in the impregnation de-differentiation phase where now toxicity has impregnated into the tissues deep in it, kind of like in the fatty deposits. And now the fungus is the only microbe that can survive that environment. So now all the germs become fungus and now they're eating the tissue. But the problem is you do not want to have fungus actively in your body because they only work on the most toxic of toxic, meaning the dead. So now your body starts to decay and you want to blame the fungus instead of the fact that your environment has become totally stagnant. So the germs are forced to change. But then when you go to the hospital, they'll say, oh, you have a superbug, you have a MRSA, you have a staph, and all of these things. When it's not superbug, they're just changing to survive that environment. And the proofs of pleomorphism really disprove germ theory in totality, because when you say, oh, there's pneumonia, that's one bacteria, tuberculosis, that's one bacteria, every germ causes one disease, but then you see these germs actively changing. And I've seen there's very small amount of videos on YouTube, you can find them, seeing the microzyma, which is the source of the germ, is like its own stem cell, seeing that little cell become a bacteria, and then it fast forwards, it becomes a fungus. It's amazing to see how intelligent the body is. The key here is to listen to that symptom, and then you want to revert that action that the microbe is doing, because the microbe is attempting to heal the body. That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to get rid of this stuff. But if you are stagnant and you can't get rid of this waste, it could potentially get bad for you, especially if you're compromised, older person, not very healthy. So when people will come up to me and say, if in that instance, would you recommend antibiotics? I would never really recommend antibiotics in a life or death situation, potentially. And that's a little nuance there. You want to survive, I get it. Can you use other things like oregano oil, which has been proven to be just as good as antibiotics? Absolutely, you can use natural stuff. But in that instance, there is a bit of nuance there. But they're just trying to get homeostasis in the body because those germs live in your body. So they survive. They want to survive. They don't want to die. So they're trying to get it all stable. So you just got to listen to it, and you want to revert the fungus into the bacteria to the point where they're not doing anything in your body because they don't really want to unless necessary. So pleomorphism was a huge thing for me, just learning about how, oh, wow, these germs actually are they're non-specific. They are constantly changing to adapt to us. So why can't we adapt to them? That's the whole thing. We think they're bad, but we want to adapt with their action. And that goes with everybody, medical doctors, jiu-jitsu practitioners, whatever the case. You want to apply that into your practice, and it becomes so much easier.
Clean the fish tank that way.
Clean the fish tank. Yeah, you've seen that
Yeah.
little thing. You either take the fish out and put it in the fish bin.
So,
It's very
so
simple.
I guess we've seen, or at least the people that are open to alternative remedies have seen that frequency can do this, oxygen can do this.
Hmm.
There's the grounding, the sun, and there's different things and
Hmm.
practices that we can utilize to actually clean ourselves and rid ourselves
Hmm.
of the environment where these things would feel the need to do their work or flourish, so to speak.
Hmm.
So when we're going to, I guess, individuals that have a traditional thinking on this, would you have a line of actions that you would preempt almost all allopathic remedy with? I mean, and we've seen all kinds of different fads and trends, and different people
Yeah.
in the holistic environment that would suggest different things. But I think we all probably have an individual perspective on what's really worked for us as well. So.
Yeah, and this sounds very like general, but truly, diet
Mhm.
is the most important thing because we mentioned in the beginning with the gut. The gut is what is assimilating, taking in the nutrients, and then using them. So if you are not getting that nutrition, which keeps your energy and detoxification pathways going, you're gonna get weaker and weaker. And then we see it when you are not getting the food you need or the nutrition you need, you will become diseased. And the key is in the word disease, the distance from being eased. So the further you get from the distance of health, you're going to get sicker and sicker. And diet is the primary factor. I mean, where the more we learn about the advent of seed oils and what they do to the body, and the fact that we in America are eating a bunch of ingredients that are literally banned in other places, the fact that our produce is sprayed to death with pesticides, fungicides, glyphosate. We know about that, causing gut issues where your body now cannot assimilate nutrients because it has holes in its gut. Like that is really the primary factor in someone's health and the barometer whether or not they're going to be healthy. So that's the first thing when people come up to me. What are you eating? What aren't you eating? Like, tell me, are you just eating a vegan diet, right? Are you eating a carnivore diet? Are you eating an omnivore diet? Are you eating highly processed foods? Do you still use seed oils? Are you getting enough fat in your diet? That's the primary mechanism I'm looking at with their health. After that, I'll ask what their symptoms are. What are you feeling? Like, where in the body do you see a pathology? Okay, so you see swollen lymph nodes? Right. Now I know that your lymphatic system needs support. Now I know we got to flush the liver out with a castor oil pack, for instance, or a turpentine pack. Now I know we can do certain herbal protocols if you have some swollen ankles. Like, you just got to list. You can't be one size fits all with people. Some people are. And that's what allopathic doctors are. They'll just give you a drug no matter who you are, no matter what you're facing. The difference with naturopathic practitioners, at the very least, is they're going to try to make a specific type of protocol for that specific person. Everyone's different. Everyone's story is different too. That's another thing. Talking about their story. Have you dealt with any loss in the past? Are you dealing with stress? Like, how is it going financially? Like that stuff is an underrated mechanism in our health, our emotional health, which goes into German new medicine and the connection between our emotions and how we're going to heal. The Chinese knew this a long time ago. They associated anger with the liver and sadness with the lungs. Like, they knew this. Like, and everyone knows when you get angry, you feel it deep in your gut. Or sad, you feel heavy. Emotions are physical. They really are, and they can hold tension in your muscles. So you have to release that. So combining all of that, the nutrition primarily, the emotional factor, and then the symptoms. What are we going to do? So I don't ever have really anything specific, but one thing I do tell everyone to do is make sure their foods are whole, like minimal ingredient foods. Are you moving? You know, we're sitting right now, but are we going to the gym like twice a week? Are you going outside to walk 30 minutes? Something like that. And then are you happy emotionally? Like, that's a huge thing. And grounding. Are you going outside just to bare feet in the grass? 10 minutes. That's all you need to really get rid of any sort of inflammatory markers in your body. And when I made that post like last week, I was like, wow, there's not only a lot of published scientific evidence around grounding, which we all knew, we all practiced just knowing it was good, but to see how much research has actually been done was like, oh, nah, this is legit. And just doing that it's free. It's literally free. Sunlight and grounding are free, and that is such an easy way to get back to healing. I'm not saying you're gonna heal immediately doing that, but you're gonna notice a benefit as long as you do the other stuff. So yeah, like I said, everything is pertaining to one specific person. Everyone's going to be different, but the diet, the emotional health are the primary factors For sure.
How important is belief in this scenario? What the person believes is possible, and whether or not they believe in allopathic versus, real remedies.
Yeah, like just yeah, and that goes into placebo, nocebo effect. Like people will believe something is true even though they don't have it. They're still going to see an effect, which really tells you the power of the power of belief, the brain. Like you can heal even though you didn't get anything because you believe in something. I don't want people to when they get treatment from me or other naturopathic bioterrain people to have a placebo effect. I want them to see that this is legit, but you do want them to understand at least what's happening. And that's what I try to do when I like my dad and my mom. My mom has been always very natural. My dad was kind of on the fence about it. And when I gave him like the grounding sheets, for instance, I gave him like 6 months ago. And I explained, he was like, okay, so what's this? What is this? Like, I get it. So I tell him, yeah, you're just kind of getting it sounds iffy, but you're getting the energy from the earth, and then you're conducting it through silver lining into the sheets. And he's like, what? All right. So he was skeptical, but when you get a very simple explanation to them, and then he then noticed the benefit almost instantaneously, he goes, okay, I'm a believer now. Keep giving me stuff. And this has been in the past where I'll tell people, yeah, this castor oil pack has castor oil is a fat. It binds into your liver, it binds in your lymphatic system, and gets toxicity out. Oh, but you know what? Just try it. See what happens to you. And then the next day they're pooping a whole ton of stuff and they're sweating and they're like, oh my God, this actually is doing something for me. Yeah, it is. So belief is important, but if you know what you're doing, they're gonna see an effect. They're going to see a positive effect in it. But belief is important because what I've seen with people that they'll take antibiotics or whatever, and they believe that it's gonna work, and actually it doesn't. And it kind of goes backwards where, oh, I got worse. So belief is a factor. It's not the primary thing. You do want to go, what I do with everything, you want to go in there with an open mind. And it's weird now because people don't really have that anymore with regards to their healing. They only do one thing, and you want to have an open mind with all these things because there are going to be things that you don't know about that can be potentially very helpful for you, which is why I don't want to really focus on just one thing. There's naturopath, but then there's osteopathy, which is the manipulation of the bones and the fluids. There's acupuncture, which you want to get into, herbalism, homeopathy as well. There's so many things that you want to have an open mind to understand. And then for each and every person, you can tailor your treatment based on what they say, what they believe, and see if it works. I mean, belief is important for sure. And that goes into the contagion studies that I posted about the other day. There were cases at which they were trying to make people sick, literally with fluids. And these people believed that they can get sick with these fluids. So did the patients. And none of them got sick. So it's like, how belief is powerful. How powerful is it? That's the thing. And there was one example, actually, I think it was like in the early 1900s, where this guy, they told him that they were going to give him a fluid of just cold filtrate, so literally snot, and then inject it into his nose. So then the next day, he's getting, stuffy nose, he's getting a little cough, whatever, cold symptoms. But then they tell him the day after that, oh, we actually gave you saline water solution. So you're actually not sick. And then he got better the same day. So the power is right there. Like, oh, you think you're going to get sick. Now you can get sick. But then he was told the actual answer and he got better, which goes into the whole contagion model. If you want to go into that with the power of belief.
Well, I mean, if you paid attention to somebody like the Iceman, there's something to it. You do the breath work, you do his breath work, you go in the ice baths, there's something to it. Most of us aren't ready to inject ourselves with some neurotoxin or something else, though, just to prove it. And, maybe there is that fine line between I know something and I have complete faith and belief in something. And, that's individual as it's going to get as well. Let's go into some of these diseases that you've completely debunked. I want people to go to your page and to your podcast for in-depth self-discovery, because I mean, they can hear it here and we're not going to have time to go into the depth that you do. And I if we touch on it a little bit, I think it'll drive them there. That way they can get what they actually need to understand that Lyme isn't what we were told it was. Spanish flu was not what we were told it was. Polio, tuberculosis, smallpox, it goes on and on and on. But you've covered them. So what was your most recent one? It was Lyme, right?
It was Lyme. Yeah, so I could hit on Lyme and then we'll just go through it. So with Lyme disease, obviously, and this is a big one too. A lot of people, especially now, are getting diagnosed with Lyme disease more and more. That's at least what I've been seeing. And it's a very emotional thing because Lyme disease, what I was finding in my research, is really a cop-out diagnosis when doctors will tell you they have Lyme because they don't know what you actually have. So it's easy because Lyme disease has 50 different symptoms associated with the condition. 50? So like that's so non-specific. So now someone can present with one or two symptoms of those 50. Oh yeah, we can call you Lyme now because that's a differential diagnosis. Now we can give you a cocktail of a bunch of antibiotics to take. So it's an emotional thing where people are dealing with chronic illness, maybe a trauma, something that is affecting them deeply, and now they're just told Lyme and they just become their diagnosis. That's one thing I don't want ever people to do is become identifying with your diagnosis. Like if you acquiesce, yeah, I have cancer, I am cancer, I'm gonna die, you will probably die because you're just becoming it and you're not really doing anything to help your body and the emotional state as well. But with Lyme disease, essentially they found an association, and that's a key in the scientific literature. When they say they have an association, it does not show that there's a shown causation. A causation is, yeah, let me isolate this germ right here, and let me put it into a person, and then we'll see pathology. That's a causal factor. They have never done this. What they see is sometimes they'll see ticks bite people, and then they get sick. Fine. That is an association. You have to prove that whatever is in the tick, the bacteria in this case, is actually the cause of the pathology. And when I was looking at this research, I was like, oh man, they've never actually done this like at all. It was a bunch of assumptions because there were people out of Europe that were getting sick after tick bites. And then there were people in upstate New York and Long Island and Connecticut that were getting sick after tick bites. And then they were doing like blood cultures for the bacteria. And the people out of Shelter, it was a Shelter Island, or it was Long Island actually, where it was 36 people with Lyme disease that were bitten by a tick and whatnot. 2 out of 36 had a positive culture for the bacteria. So that means 34 out of 36 did not. So right then and there, you're like, okay, this is stupid. This is not at all what we think it is. And then they tested 8 bunnies where they had 300 ticks, all of which supposedly have Lyme, were given to bunnies to bite their bellies. So these bunnies were tied up with like rope and whatnot, and their bellies were out. And then it was 300 ticks, so about 80 per bunny. And they were just biting them for hours and hours on days on end. And then they tested for their blood culture for the bunnies after, and guess what? None of them had the bacteria. None of them. What they resorted to were antibody tests, which is garbage science because antibodies are non-specific. I made a post about this. The more we learn about these antibodies, we don't even honestly know if they're actually real because they've never been seen in nature, just like a virus. In any case, the guy that they named the disease after, Dr. Burgdorfer, the germ at least, he is quoted saying, yeah, the antibody research is shoddy at best. Like, we need to redo this completely because you have healthy people who test positive, you have unhealthy people that test negative, and then you have people that clearly have the Lyme pathology test negative. So it's like, this is not consistent here. We need to actually find something consistent. But that's what they do. They'll rely on non-specific markers like an antibody to tell people that they're sick instead of relying on the specific marker, which is the bacteria. And then they actually did, like, I think it was 4 different isolation studies where they isolated bacteria and then attempted to see if they caused the disease, and they failed. And then they tried to find the culture, the blood culture in them, and they failed. I did it at the end of my podcast where I went into those specific studies, and it was something like 2% out of 175 patients had a bacteria in their blood. So if you're going to say that I have Lyme disease because there's a bacteria in my blood becoming a pathogen of sorts, a parasite, you need to find that in all the people, not in 1 or 2% of them, because then it's like, oh, this has nothing to do with Lyme disease. And then they're told that if they take antibiotics, they're going to be better. And with Lyme disease, you're given anywhere between a 4 to 12 week cocktail of antimicrobials, amoxicillin, penicillin, all these things. And what do antibiotics do? As we mentioned, they acidify your pH, they acidify your tissues, they cause stagnation in your liver and in your lymphatic system, they ruin your adrenals, and now you get worse and worse and worse and worse to the point where now 10 weeks later after your initial tick bite, you have got deteriorated significantly, and you are associating that deterioration with the tick bite and not the antibiotic use. So that's what I truly think Lyme disease is. It's antibiotic use and them becoming a chronic illness due to them relying on that system. Another funny thing I found was there's a thing called tick toxicosis, where we know bugs, they're a nuisance and they all bite. Certain bugs have toxic enzymes in their salivary glands. So we know, a spider, a black widow, for instance, can potentially kill you. A venomous snake, something like that, because their enzymes in their venom or whatnot can actually cause, thickening of the blood. You can die. So ticks also have a minor toxic enzyme in their salivary glands. So if you get bitten by a tick and you develop a rash, you don't have to worry about it. Pull out the tick from its head, you are fine. But what they'll say is, if you take out the tick and go to the hospital, you will be diagnosed as Lyme. But if you leave the tick in your body, they're going to call it tick toxicosis, which is like, what? Like, why is that? Why is it different there? Because with Lyme disease, they don't know whether or not the patient has actually got bit by a tick. Whereas if you go to the hospital, if you have a tick in your forearm, there you go. They know it's a tick. So they'll call it tick toxicosis. And when you look at the symptoms of tick toxicosis, they are the same symptoms as acute Lyme disease. A rash, maybe some flu-like symptoms, a fever. It'll go away in a day or two. It's that simple. So what I think the initial reaction is potentially could be a tick reaction to the bite, which is fine. Everyone gets bitten. You get a reaction. It's whatever. But then you take antibiotics, and then now you develop actual Lyme, which is due to the antibiotic use, not the Lyme, or not the tick, rather. Another big thing where I was told after my post was, someone said people tend to pull the body of the tick out of them, and when you do that, their entire gut and all of that toxicity that was initially in their salivary glands can then be injected into your blood, which can cause an even further acute reaction to the tick bite. So that's something people don't want to do. I live now in upstate New York. There's a billion ticks. Personally, I've never been bitten by a tick. My dog has a couple of times, but I know how to pull them out. But again, nuisance, it's not really something to worry about. What I've heard people talk about is, oh, they've tried to do, biological weapon stuff with ticks. And then I looked into the studies just to see. They were doing stuff out of Fort Detrick in Maryland, where they were trying to put bacterial toxins into ticks to try to bite people, and they failed miserably. Never mind that the first cases were like in upstate New York and Connecticut, nowhere near Maryland. So that doesn't make sense. And then you had those in Vietnam where they were trying to make ticks bite crops or eat crops so that the Viet Cong couldn't hide. And that was what they wanted to do, and they failed. And there was no major Lyme disease epidemic after the Vietnam War either. The Marines weren't coming back with Lyme disease. They were coming back with PTSD and maybe poisoning from gases. Yeah, but not Lyme disease. So I don't believe that whole bioweapon stuff with Lyme disease. I believe that it's a misinterpretation of a rash, erythema migrans. That's what it's called. And they'll say it's specific, but it's not, because I looked it up. I was like, erythema migrans, Lyme disease. And then there was a page where it had a bunch of pictures of different rashes, and they look exactly the same as Lyme or a spider or a rash, heat rash, eczema. They look non-specific. Because why? The body just knows one thing: heal. I'm going to push this stuff out and get inflamed so that we can get it out. That's all it is. It's then the doctors misinterpreting everything, and then they'll make it specific, and then they'll give you antibiotic, and then you're screwed. And okay, so I'm not saying people don't get sick with a Lyme disease diagnosis. Disease is real. The association to a specific title, a specific disease, is not there at all. And I think also trauma and deep-rooted like stuff you've dealt with as a kid, and you get tight, and now you start to get decaying little by little. You can go to the doctor, and they're going to be like, oh, it's probably Lyme disease, stealth Lyme. They'll call it stealth Lyme. Lyme disease that you didn't know you had, but it just came about. Stealth Lyme. And I was like, what? Why is this is such a fake illness? Like, what people are falling for this. It was very much giving long COVID, where again, big umbrella of symptoms. You could either be obese and always sick, and they'll give you long COVID, or you took a vaccine, 2 weeks later you're sick, they'll give you long COVID, because it's all just a test result. It's just a PCR test. That's all it is. Same thing with Lyme. It's just an antibody test, and it's been disproven. It's been falsified. Like, we know it doesn't mean anything. And if we know most people don't have the bacteria in their blood, it therefore cannot be the bacteria. So
Yeah,
That's Lyme
I'm
in a
so
nutshell.
conspiracy minded or realistic in the sense that I figured that the bioweapon stories could have just been covered to get more of these treatments out there and more profit into the marketplace and perpetuate
Hmm.
just this industry which wouldn't exist. Yeah,
That's a
it
good
wouldn't
theory.
exist if we took different approaches. If we weren't
No.
willingly getting into line for these things, just like the vaccine program, and just like actually what you were about to go into, I think, is HIV. And I've had this
Hmm.
conversation on here a couple times about HIV being the lifestyle and the drugs, and it was opportunistic as it gets for huge industry to come in and, if nothing else, make a lot
Mm,
of money and medicate.
absolutely. And HIV was just the prequel
Yeah.
to COVID. They followed the same exact playbook, the same testing and everything. So with HIV, what I think people get confused of is AIDS exists. HIV
Right.
does not. The actual viral cause of the disease does not exist. COVID-19 does not exist. That is the virus. Symptoms of respiratory detoxification, they exist. But when you start to apply a viral existence to symptoms, that's when you need to prove the actual claim, and they can't do that. But in any case, with AIDS, this was an old set of disease. It was really, we've known for a long time, caused by drug use, cancer drugs, street drug use rather, malnourishment, and that's why we were seeing AIDS really affect people that were homeless, drug users, or kids in Africa that just simply weren't getting enough food. So they were developing AIDS. And AIDS is really to the point where now your body cannot heal. Your quote immune system is weak because now your body isn't producing the white blood cells, the lymphatic system isn't removing stuff. So now you're weak. So we've known, and this was before the HIV era in the 60s, 70s. We knew that that was what associated AIDS to drug use and malnourishment. So now you had in the late 80s, early 90s, the very first HIV patients were 5 gay men that all had pneumonia. So now, right then and there, now they associate pneumonia or any sort of flu-like symptom to HIV, right? And then in the study, which I was sent the other day, I read it, and what they did was they asked them, "Do you guys do drugs or inhalant drugs?" And they all 5 of them said, "Yes, we take poppers." And poppers, for anyone listening, they are inhalant drugs that mainly homosexual men take because it loosens the anal sphincter to facilitate anal sex. Problem with that is it's a very toxic drug, full of nitrites and full of all the garbage. So now you get sick from taking that drug. Now you develop pneumonia because they're inhalant drugs. So now you're just inhaling it kind of like a vape, and now all that stuff goes into your lungs. So what does the bacteria do? They're like, what is this? This is toxic to my lung. Let's take the pneumonia bacillus that is always there, mind you. It's always in your mucus lining, always in your lungs. Now we're going to react, and now we're going to eat this garbage and push it out. Now you have pneumonia, right? So now they associate the gay community, not the use of poppers, with AIDS. They make basically no connection. They just say it in passing. They take inhalant drugs, and that's it. So now this entire community just keeps taking these drugs because no one really told them that they were bad. And that's why primarily we saw homosexuals dying of AIDS, primarily because of the poppers, but also because the Fauci and all the CDC and all that, they figured out a way. Let's really perpetuate this pandemic. Let's give them AZT, which is the antiviral. They did the same thing with COVID. They were giving I forget the exact name of the drug because I kind of mixed them up. They were. Do you remember
Well,
off the
they had a
top?
couple different ones, but remdesivir
Remdesivir.
was the
There we go.
deadly, the
Yeah, yeah.
dangerous one.
That was the deadly one. So they were giving people antiviral AZT, and AZT was actually shelved prior because it was giving
Right.
people AIDS, and it was giving people Kaposi sarcoma, which is a cancer, and lymphatic cancer, mind you. And these gay men that were already taking drugs were given antiviral, and that gave them cancer. They would keep taking them because they were prescribed to continually taking them at home, and they were deteriorating and they were dying left and right. So now people think, oh my God, this a virus is attacking people, but it's not. It's the drugs. It's always the drugs, and this is why people, when they'll learn their first learning terrain, bacterial and viral illnesses, quote, are all associated with toxicity. All of them. Each and every one is either a violent change in the environment, or because you added something into your body that you shouldn't have. And HIV is no different. So now what they do is they use the PCR test, which is not a test. It is an amplification tool at best. Everyone's seen the videos of Kerry Mullis, the guy who literally created the method, saying it doesn't tell you that you're sick. It doesn't tell you what you had was going to get you sick. And it doesn't tell you where these sequences came from. So you don't know. It's literally just a magnifying glass that they converted into a tool to see if you're sick. So now people are testing positive because what you're finding is really non-specific proteins in humans. Same thing with COVID. I just did a control study post where I covered the PCR, and they did like 98 and 99 overlap sequences of bacteria, fungus, and the human genome in the PCR. So you're testing people with their own stuff. That's why you get Coca-Cola, motor oil, animals testing positive, because it's not finding anything. But then you push it to a high cycle threshold, which is like 40, 50. Mind you, Fauci said anything above 20 or 25 is useless. But these people were doing 30, 35, 40, 45. They did the same thing with COVID and HIV. So now you have straight people testing positive. Now they're scared. Now they're giving AZT, and now they're dying. It's so sick and dark, and it's what they did. And with the antibody test, and I just made a post 2 days ago. I posted the thing from the Perth group. It was a document they did, and the Perth group, for anyone listening, they were one of the first groups really to push terrain. They were in the 70s around that time, and they were calling out HIV just like we were calling out COVID. The lack of isolation, the treatment, all that stuff. They made a document where they had 70 plus conditions that you can test positive for the HIV antibody test. One of them is obviously being completely healthy. Another one being pregnant, and basically every sort of pathology you can think of is under that list. So again, all these people that are sick or completely healthy are running to these tests, PCR testing nothing, antibody tests completely non-specific, and now they're all getting AZT and they're all dying. And now you can think, oh, it's a virus, but why did Magic Johnson survive? He had a pretty deep HIV diagnosis because he was obviously promiscuous. We all know Magic was, but he didn't die. All these celebrities pretty much didn't die. Why? None of them were taking AZT. Magic has literally said, I did not take the drug. So, and that's why he's healthy completely, because it was always the drug. HIV is not a diagnosis. AIDS is. But just because you test positive does not mean you have AIDS, especially if you're a healthy person that's never taken drugs before. So it's garbage. It's just garbage.
With that one, I've often gone back and wondered: did Magic believe the lie, or was this much darker? I mean, he was forced to retire from the NBA when he still had years available. Was this a giant commercial and poster and advertisement? For all the wrong reasons. And, we will probably never know the definitive answer on it, but it's definitely something to ponder, especially going through all of these others that have had this same script. So, Spanish flu.
Yes, let's do that. So, Spanish flu, probably when I started this whole thing, was the biggest one that people were asking me to do because they were confused and all that. So obviously we are told that it is one of the most deadliest flu pandemics in history. They said that COVID was more deadly, so it passed the Spanish flu this time and third. And it's funny because it's called the Spanish flu, but it happened in the United States. Yeah. So it's stupid. But so essentially what you had here were all these military personnel, Army, Navy, Marines, whatever, being sent to World War I. And in World War I, they're shell shock, PTSD, exposed to a bunch of different gaseous poisons, and they're coming back home sick, right? And they think, oh, they're getting sick because of the foreign infectious organisms, which is like, what? So they're scared that they're going to get sick and bring back germs from these other nations. So what they do is before they go out to deploy, they're given 26 vaccines in a matter of a month or so. So all these different vaccines are covering supposedly different illnesses. And listen, all vaccines are bad, all of them. But the ones they did back then were extremely unpurified. We're talking like blended up lungs and like mucus and animal parts, glutaraldehyde, all these things put into a tube and then injected directly into your blood. So now all these people, before they go to war, are getting sick and dropping dead left and right. Because you're not just giving them one shot or two that their body can potentially handle, you're giving them 26 different shots. Now, why are you giving them 26 different shots? Because again, of the foreign, if germs coming to the United States, supposedly, that was the fear propaganda. But also because the war ended. The war ended pretty quickly. They thought it was going to be longer. So now they just start pumping these soldiers with all these shots, these extra shots. And then they start pumping them to the masses, to the regular population, because they have so much extra. They literally had like a generation's worth of vaccines left over. So now they make again a propaganda push of get your shots from the Spanish germs, whatever. And that's why it's called the Spanish flu, because they were blaming the other nations for the germ, when it was always them getting a billion shots in their military bases, which is why when you look at the map in the United States, Spanish flu cases were always near military bases, all of them, because that's where they were getting them from. And then the immediate population was getting them. And now they can say, oh, it was a flu pandemic, you're having flu-like symptoms or whatnot, so now we're going to wear masks. So that's when you see the pictures, the association with COVID. A lot of people wore masks during the Spanish flu, and all of them were getting 26, 27 different shots. There is a book called The Poison Needle by Eleanor McBean. Her and her family were alive during that time, and they never got vaccinated and were around people that were getting vaccinated during the Spanish flu and were very sick. Their family actually, I believe they were doctors, so they were going to each home taking care of people, and they never got sick. Not one time did they get sick. And she noted it multiple times that the people that weren't getting shots were not getting sick, and they were taking care of people. They were also, again, the same thing with the pharmaceutical system. Not only were the vaccines an issue, these people were going to the hospitals and being pumped to the brim with aspirin, which destroys everything in your body. It's an anti-inflammatory. It's a non-specific anti-inflammatory. So again, and they're treating them with I forget, it's in my post, but they were treating them with a bunch of different really unpurified ingredients in, because this is the 1900s. So they're treating them, they're dying in hospital, they're being pumped with aspirin because aspirin just came out. And aspirin, actually, if you put too much in your gut, it can actually become a gas, which is very deadly for you. On top of the vaccines, on top of the masks, you can perpetuate a pandemic. On top of that, the radiation connection. So this was the first time where really we had strong non-native EMF in the form of radio lines blanketing cities. So I think everyone knows now that non-native EMF isn't very healthy for you, no matter what they try to gaslight you to think. The sun and the moon are pretty much the only EMF we need, including the EMF from the earth and from each other. Each person has around a 6-foot aura of sorts of electromagnetic field from our heart. We have stimulus from our body. We are electrical beings. So any non-native electrical impulse will affect us. We're kind of like batteries a little bit. So these radio lines are emitting a sort of frequency that is not natural to the body, not natural to the earth. And when you look at radiation sickness, a lot of those symptoms look exactly like what COVID was and like what Spanish flu were. Exactly. But with Spanish flu, you also had what they call conglomerate illnesses, where it looked like somebody was just getting divine plagues, bulbs and bleeding from all their orifices, and just extremely hot, white fluid, seizing. And that doesn't just happen because of radiation. That happens because you're getting 26 different vaccines at one time. So now your body's just overstimulated. It can't deal with it and you die. So again, with these military personnel, they were going out into the war. They were getting these shots, but they were also dealing with radiation because you had the use of radio waves in the cities, but also in the battlefield to call in airplanes and all that. They were being exposed to that sort of radiation. And then there's a book called what was it? The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Furstenberg, who he talks about the Spanish flu being really the lead way into this whole radiation era. But before that, a couple decades prior, they were making railroad tracks in these small towns. And railroad tracks, again, they carry their own electromagnetic impulse. And he found that a lot of people nearby those railroad tracks in these towns were facing fibromyalgia, inflammatory illnesses, getting flu-like symptoms, and they didn't know why. Because you're near a non-native EMF. So when you connect that, and it's really, a Spanish flu was a conglomerate of the EMF, the vaccines, the hospital protocols, and the war itself. Because the war itself is stressful for these soldiers. They're coming home with all these different pathologies because they saw horrible things down there, and they were exposed to a bunch of different gases, which were used in weapons during that time, which is why they banned it in the 40s. So they're coming back sick, and now you can blame the Spanish all you want, blame the Indians all you want. It was caused by you, the Americans, really. And that's what the Spanish
combination
was,
of all those things was just a plethora of insanity.
A recipe for disaster. And the Spanish flu era actually was one we point to was one of the first instances in modern allopathic medicine where they actually did contagion studies to try and prove that flus were contagious. And this was done in jails primarily by Dr. Rosenau. And there were a lot of different doctors that did it. But they would take the fluids from people and inject them into other people. They would have people shake each other's hands, heavy breathe, like right on their face. And these were soldiers doing it. These were jails that were doing it with their people in the jails. They had sick people in hospitals, sharing blankets, all that stuff. And nobody got sick. These were hundreds of patients across like 8 or 9 different studies of like 4 or 5 different doctors. And each one of them objectively failed. You may get 1 or 2 people presenting with cold symptoms, but the vast majority had no reaction whatsoever. So right then and there, it's like, oh, contagion is completely misunderstood. And when you look into the history of contagion, I mean, Louis Pasteur and these guys were actually the very first to try and push this into the mainstream. But there's a guy, Mike Stone, who runs virology.com. He posts on his Telegram a bunch of old newspapers, and you can see that the vast majority of people were actually just didn't believe it at all. They were like, this is stupid. Germs don't cause disease. And there was a lot of people saying this. But again, these other guys, Louis Pasteur and et al., had the backing of the government, had the backing of the crown, had the backing, all the money in the world. So that's why they can perpetuate the contagion model, because now you can get patients and customers from the contagion model. Rosenau was an allopathic doctor, and he disproved contagion. And he was like, at the end of his study, he was like, there's a lot of questions I need answered. He basically was saying he was shocked. He was like, oh, this is crazy. We need to learn because this is insane. That's what, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he was saying. And there have been a bunch of contagious studies after Spanish flu that have all followed the same, thing where they fail. They inject people, they fail. They breathe on them, they fail. They isolate the germ, they fail. So how many times are you going to fail until you say, oh, contagion has been falsified? Spanish flu was, again, the very first instance where they actually did it in the literature, which is great to read. If anyone wants to read it, you can find it. Rosenau experiments, and you'll be enamored.
So do you personally think, along the lines of the Pasteur stuff, that they knew what they were doing to milk by pasteurization, and they knew that the end result would be an unhealthier public? Or that was just a consequence or an accident?
That's a good question. That is a great question. I love talking about raw milk. That is a great question. I think it's maybe a little bit of 50-50, because Pasteur was a straight up liar. And there's 2 books that I recommend reading: Béchamp versus Pasteur, and then The Secret Science of Louis Pasteur. So Béchamp versus Pasteur deals with Antoine Béchamp, who was the one that discovered pleomorphism, and how Pasteur was plagiarizing his work all the time. And then the second book, Secret Science of Louis Pasteur, was released by a great nephew that was told basically by his family lineage or whatnot that Pasteur did not want his work to be published. Now, if you're one of the most prolific, famous doctors in the world, being rich from your practice, why wouldn't you want your work being published? Oh, because he lied over and over again. With rabies, for instance, he was getting, again, unpurified goop from a sick dog, taking their skull, grinding it up, and then injecting like a cup of it into the brain of a dog. That's not a proper experiment. And of course, the dog dies, and then he'll say, "Oh, I found the virus." It's like, what are we doing with vaccines? For instance, he made a bovine vaccine, and he had a group that wasn't vaccinated and a group that was vaccinated, and then he had like a bunch of cattle or whatnot, and he showed them dead, and then he showed the other cattle were alive. When in actuality, the cows that died got a more virulent vaccine than the ones that didn't. So there was no real unvaccinated group. The group that was unvaccinated simply got an attenuated vaccine where they get ingredients added to make the reaction lessening. So that's the type of guy Louis Pasteur was. He just lied overtly over and over again. So now in the raw milk era, really, I mean, mind you, raw milk has been around for 10,000 plus years, and we never had an issue whatsoever until we brought the cows and the cattle into the cities, and then we started feeding them garbage. We started literally feeding them garbage because cows will eat anything, giving them food scraps, giving them cardboard, giving them beer. They were literally giving beer. And then swill, which was a waste product of the brewery business. So now these cows obviously are getting sick. Duh, they're getting sick. And then their milk becomes toxic. So to make it less toxic, which actually made it more toxic, they were adding antibiotics into the milk as well as chalk, like literal chalk. They were putting that in the milk, and then they were selling it to people in the cities. Lo and behold, they started getting sick. And Louis Pasteur associates Listeria bacteria with causing the issues with the raw milk, when it was never the Listeria. Why? Because regular raw milk that we've drank for 20,000 whatever plus years always has Listeria in it. And then our guts naturally also have Listeria. The soil has Listeria. So it's everywhere. Yet you're blaming the Listeria because that is where it's going to react. The milk, the mammal, the udder, that's where it lives in the cow. So it's going to reside in there, see the reaction, and eat up the toxicity. And in the eating of toxicity, you're going to get symptoms of removal of waste. And then you get, profuse diarrhea, vomiting. You get food poisoning symptoms for a day, 2, 3 days, whatever. And you're blaming the germ and not the fact that you're drinking antibiotic-filled chalk garbage milk. So he, instead of saying, let's bring the cows back into the grasslands, he just says, okay, let's heat this milk up 200 plus Fahrenheit. We'll flash heat it for a couple seconds and we're good. So now people don't have food poisoning symptoms anymore. They start developing lactose intolerance. Now they can't process the milk because you got rid of everything nutritious in the milk, the bacteria, the nutrients, the enzymes, everything get beneficial. Specifically, you got rid of lactose, which is the sugar that helps you, digest itself, really. And now you are drinking all this stuff, and now your body cannot handle it. So now you get all these different GI symptoms. Now you get rashes, and now we have an entire generation, which, 50% can't process milk anymore. And we wonder why. Yet, for me, I developed, celiac disease when I was 16, had gut issues, had all the vaccines ever. When I started drinking raw milk, I noticed an immediate benefit of my digestion improving. And of course, you're going to get flushing. Sometimes you drink it because raw milk is a detoxification food. If you have something in your gut that is bothering you, the raw milk is going to get rid of it. But you're going to associate that reaction with a disease when it's not a disease. It's a form of bioregulation. Because 9 times out of 10, when I drink it, I feel great. I'm getting stronger. My energy is crazy. My eczema is healed. So it's a magic food that they just figured out how to demonize. And it's harder and harder to buy. It's getting ridiculous. How many deaths are associated with beer? Yet it's completely legal. So Pasteur, again, he blamed the germ. He pasteurized the milk. He made a bunch of money doing it. And we are now facing the consequences of that. And now people are scared because raw milk over the course of 2 decades has 2,000 food poisoning instances. Yet every year there are more food poisoning illnesses produced by produce or tuna or pizza over raw milk. Pasteurized dairy too has more food poisoning instances and more deaths associated with it than raw milk does. Yet we still think raw milk is bad.
Fortunately, I have personally seen the demand for it increase, not only where I live, but where I was living across the country. And It's becoming more and more available. Of course, they're labeling it not for human consumption,
Pet
and all
food.
this other stuff. But
Yeah.
obviously, with the prices they're charging and how much their stock they're going through, the demand is increasing. So people are getting turned on to this again, and in one step after another, they will get healthier from it. And that was a big.
Oh,
It was a big turning
absolutely.
point for myself as well. As soon as I started drinking raw milk, I was like, "Oh, it wasn't the milk at all. It was the
No,
pasteurization."
exactly. And there's a farm nearby me, about maybe 15, 20 minutes away. The milk is freaking delicious. It's only $5 a gallon. You can legit live
Yeah.
off of raw milk. It has everything you need in terms of macros, in terms of just everything you need. But for anyone listening that wants to really get into raw milk, I mean, if you have lactose intolerance, I recommend you drink a little bit, get it into your diet little by little, see how you feel, then drink a cup of it, and you'll drink more and more, and you'll notice an extreme benefit pretty much right away.
It's my favorite.
So it tastes
so much better.
too.
It's my favorite after dinner snack. I tell my dad, and I'll
Oh
put
yeah,
a little maple syrup in it. Oh my goodness, it's ridiculous.
yeah.
All right, so you have all these other diseases that people can go on, find on your website. Follow your podcast, because how many episodes are you in now?
I think right now I've done 9. I've done 3 interviews, and then the rest were diseases. So I've covered tuberculosis. I don't know off the top. I forget
smallpox and rabies.
But yeah, smallpox was a big one. Yes, you're right. Smallpox. I did that. That was a long one, but that was really fun to do. If for a little taste, if anyone wants to check it out, smallpox really was caused by not only malnourishment but primarily hygiene. Right. Like hygiene was horrible back in the 1800s, and they reap the benefits of being disgusting people. So if you're living in poop, you're gonna get sick. So that's what smallpox really was. But there's a lot more to it, and the vaccine was horrible. Vaccines actually came from smallpox. So yeah, I mean, if you want to listen to that, go ahead. But yeah, I've covered a lot of diseases. Right now on Instagram, I have like 15 contagion debunked posts, which go into different diseases. I've done rabies. Most recently, I also did a mold post, because a lot of people think mold causes illness. You'll be surprised about the answer. I want to do an HIV and a cancer one as well. But I mean, it's a lot of diseases. I can't do every single one, but I'll try.
You're going to jump into parasites?
I did one already about parasites. You want to talk about it a little bit?
How did I miss that?
Yeah. So parasites are actually part of the pleomorphic cycle. So the cycle of the bacteria, fungus, they're part of that cycle. When you get a dead body, for instance, and you just leave it in the field there, you will, in a couple days' time, see worms come out of its own body. So it's a part of that process. Parasites are always associated primarily with gut toxicity. When you look at each parasite in their species, each one has an affinity with heavy metals. So each parasite actually eats heavy metal and processes it as a metabolite so the body can get rid of it. So that's why you see bears, for instance, they'll have 30-foot long parasites coming out of their butt, because they're eating fish that is filled with heavy metals. Fish primarily are really, I love fish, but it's getting hard to get well-sourced fish now, because all of it's either farm raised or heavy metals in the water. So all that accumulates in the fish. So now the parasite is like, oh, lots of metal for me to eat, so I'm going to eat the metal. Now you eat the fish. Now you have the heavy metals in your gut, and now you have the parasite in there. So again, you want to blame the symptoms on the parasite's action, when it really is just the food source that has the parasite there. It's eating the heavy metals. And on my post I did with parasites, I found a couple studies that actually showed that parasites are anti-cancer. They actually eat tumors. And when I've seen people that, fear-mongering natural doctors, let's say, they'll say, "Oh, cancer is a parasite," because they'll see a tumor in their tools, and they'll zoom in and they see parasites in the tumor. But why are they there? That's the thing. Why are they eating the tumor? Because it's garbage. So they're going to eat the garbage. And there are, instances of parasites eating bacteria seen in the body, because sometimes the body may send in more and more bacteria, and the bacteria that are eating the diseased tissue, they're doing a job. But sometimes there's too much. So the parasite will come in and actually eat the other bacteria, so that there's more nutrition for the others. So it's symbiosis. The body's working with each other. Oh, I sent too much. Let's bioregulate that. Let's send a parasite in there so we can eat it up. It's just like, it's so smart. And when you look at the level of parasites, pretty much everybody has. We all eat lettuce and meat and pork and chicken and whatnot. There's always going to be parasites in there, but I don't call them parasites. That we need to figure out a different name, because parasite denotes, again, we go back to belief. You think that they're going to do something that is negative to you for their benefit. That's what a parasite is. But they're not doing that, because if that's the case, they would be eating you up. They'd be eating your organs. They were eating your blood, but they're not. They're eating the heavy metals. And now we are filled with heavy metals in our bodies, unfortunately. There was a study the other day that found almost all testicles in the study had either high plastics or heavy metals in the testicles, because we're getting 70, 80 plus vaccines, all of which have aluminum, mercury. We have heavy metals in our cars, in our water bottles, and fish, everything. So all that accumulates. The parasites are a necessary response. Do I recommend doing a parasite cleanse? No. But herbal cleanses are beneficial. Again, belief. You're not killing the parasite when you do a cleanse. What you're doing is you're introducing all these herbs that provide so much nutrition to the body and get that pathway open, so that now you start flushing things out. So now when you poop, you're going to see all the stuff the parasite was eating, and maybe you'll see a couple parasites swimming in your toilet, but that's not because of them. Look at the garbage that was in your feces. That's why they're there. So when you do a herbal cleanse, just know you're not killing the parasites. You're cleaning out your terrain. That's what you're doing. So that's what parasites are. They shouldn't be called parasites. It's a misnomer.
Awesome, man. So one last question I got for you. I heard you mention flat Earth. So is
wait, there we go.
You got the map? Oh yeah,
got the map.
So is that your wildest conspiracy theory? Is that?
Yeah, that totally is. And I wasn't a flat earther, dude.
None of us were, brother. None of us were.
Yeah, none. Until I was like, wait a second. I was like, wait a minute. Because again, I moved from the city to up here, and there are a lot of mountains around here we hike. And I was on the top, and I was like,
I see too far.
I can see the city I can see the Empire State Building from here.
Were you in upstate New York? Then, where were you?
Yeah, I'm currently in upstate New York now. I'm in Orange County, maybe like like nearby West Point. So I was there, and I was like, wait a second, I can see this. That doesn't make no sense. And then when I go on a plane, for instance, I went before, when me and my wife were dating. She lived in Florida. I went to go see her in the plane. Stood out in the window just looking. I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm a Christian as well, so reading the Bible, Genesis as well, really straightforward. How God stopped the sun, God stopped the moon. He did not stop the earth. The sun has its own course. And then going deeper into, there's a lot of glitchy videos with NASA that they provide. There's a lot of, scuba divers seen in the camera. There's water bubbles next to astronauts. This doesn't make any sense. And then I think it's just objective thinking. At this point, my parents were not either, until I started sending them videos like, watch this. And they're like, wait a second. And now every time they go to the beach, they're like, oh, it's pretty freaking flat. And then misunderstanding, the what's the stupid thing they say? It's refraction or it's so garbage. Brother, oh my God.
Most people I talk to are just not even ready, not willing to entertain, cannot possible. But I've been on it long term, and the person that introduced me to it the first time was an NYU professor who, I was honestly, I was mocking him. I was ridiculing him. I was like, you're so smart. How could you entertain this? And it took a long time before I ever went down the path of debunking what he was saying. And
and then you realize, and then what's their formula? 8 MC. What is it? I forget. I'm butchering it right now. It's a specific type of set of miles that you have for curvature.
0.8 squared. Yeah.
Yes. And how that is always falsified, all the time.
It's never factored into anything. Every engineer who's ever built anything has totally disregarded the need for it.
And how so many pilots say it's flat. That was a big thing for me. How all the astronauts are Masons. That was a big thing. And just this looks like it was a ploy to make people think that they don't matter. That's what I think the globe Earth was. If you can make people think that they're in a vacuum of nothingness, mind you, a vacuum can't exist without containment. That was another thing. I was like, oh my God. But again, you can't see the curvature. I'm a big, again, I hate modern day science, but if you follow the scientific method, that is actual science. If you cannot observe curvature, it's not there. Like you just make people believe it. If you can make people believe that we are, rotating at X miles an hour to the vacuum of space, nothingness, then yeah, we don't matter. That's why there's so many atheists now and whatnot. But when you realize, wait, if we are in a stationary plane that is protected by a firmament or whatnot with containment, then we matter. Then there's something there that created us for a reason. We are loved, and they don't want you to think it that way because they want you to be selfish and they want you to think we don't matter, and then that's easier to control people
and
like that.
Solzhenitsyn, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, or whatever his last name was, said that if you can make them believe absurdities, you can make them commit atrocities. And over and over and over again throughout this conversation, we've talked about some atrocious actions and the atrocities of the past. If we don't learn from them now and correct course, then we're all in big trouble.
And what was that? The CIA director in the 50s, he said, when our disinformation campaign is complete, everything the American people believe will be a lie.
We will know it's complete when everything they believe is a lie.
Yeah.
Brother, what a great conversation. I am so grateful you took the time to stop in with us. And look, I think people need to go to your page. They need to listen to your podcast. The world can't possibly have enough of us screaming from the top of the mountains that we see nothing but a plane.
Agree 100%.
So tell us again where we can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. UnderCover Virologist on Instagram. I do have a Twitter. I really don't use it that much, but Instagram primarily is how you can get in touch with me. My email is jdtheuv@gmail.com. So if anyone wants to email me, ask questions, DM me, whatever, I'm always available. I'm always on my phone, really. I want to change that, really.
And your podcast is Germs Are Our Friends, correct?
Yeah, Germs Are Friends on Spotify. All the links are on Instagram as well, so if you could just go to the bio, link, boom.
And I'll put it in all the show notes and the social posts that I put together for sure.
Absolutely. And I'll forget one thing. We have last year, maybe almost 2 years ago, me and all of those terrain practitioners, we developed a school it's called The End of COVID, and it's also on my bio if anyone wants to go check it out. But it's probably the most in-depth bioterrain school you're ever going to get, unless we do a second version. But it covers not only what I do with specific diseases, but then also modalities. So we have herbalism, we have homeopathy, we have osteopathy, we have all this stuff. And then going into the history of vaccines. So if that is something that people have interest in, instead of paying, thousands or hundreds of dollars or whatnot for natural courses, it's pretty cheap. I don't make money off of it, but I did help make it. So it's like my baby almost. So if anyone's interested in learning more, you can go into that link as well on the bio and it's just all online. So it was a great resource that we created for people to learn more. And we had almost 130,000 people take it.
That's awesome.
Which was insane. Like we didn't expect that much, but more people need to learn about this stuff. And it gets a little bit intimidating at times, a lot of information. So we tried to make it very easy to digest.
And the more things like this you do, I think obviously we're on for an hour and 20 minutes or whatever. And, people aren't going to have to get so completely overwhelmed with their entire earth shattering. But little bits and pieces, you keep putting it out there and you're going to keep leading people back to your page and back to information where they'll just get more and more that's digestible. And then it will all start to make sense across the board for more and more people, hopefully.
Exactly. Great.
Jacob, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to see what you do next.
Absolutely. Me too. Me too. We'll see what happens, but pleasure having me, Josh. I enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for being here, brother.
Thank you, man.
Bro, that was... Welcome to the Josh Button Podcast, where we discuss health, wellness, and outliers from society.